All right, this is the March 10th, 2025 GUAC maintainers meeting. As always, this is subject to the Linux Foundation's antitrust policy and the OpenSSF Code of Conduct. This meeting is being recorded and will be placed on YouTube after the fact. Um, I don't see any new names on here, so I guess we'll skip straight to whatever's on the agenda. We don't have anything pre-written, so I guess what's on maintainers' minds this week?
You asked a question and as I was joining, so what were you
Yeah,
asking?
I was just saying, there's nothing on the agenda at the moment. So, is there anything in particular that y'all want to talk about this week?
The only things for me are um, folks are asking like again how GUAC could potentially be used to help out LF themselves as maybe an integration to LFX or some of these other things as like, hey, we have these vulnerabilities, great, we're downloading these S bombs, blah blah blah. Can we throw that up in LFX as a mechanism there, and so they can run a GUAC. And again, they're actually asking for two separate things. One is like almost like a per project, like GUAC, or rather almost like, even simpler than that. They're also asking for still the larger thing, which is, hey, different LF foundations are running into things of, we have 30, we have, 300 projects, and we need to essentially make sure if there is another log4j, which projects does this impact? And so that we can take all those projects, throw them all into a room, as opposed to what's currently being done is it's a free for all for everybody. Um, the same thing actually goes with Kubernetes itself a little bit, like the Kubernetes project. They have a bunch of sub projects. There's some stuff there. So I wonder if and again, I don't want to put more work on Ben's lap, but I think that's kind of like more on the Ben side of like, hey, organize, helping sort of communicate with those folks. I could definitely sync you up with the people who I was talking to say, hey, even if it's like we can, show what that sort of thing looks like. That's one of the bigger things. The other smaller thing to, and again, we can talk about this in any order. The other thing that still was being brought up was, hey, with stuff like trustification or trustify and yada yada, and some of the other things, is there still this sort of good way for us to simplify, like have almost like different guac levels of like, yeah, if you have 1,000 different, things, and you need to track all of that over, months and months and months. Sure, you need the graph, you need all this stuff. Oh, you just, some folks are still asking, can guac just, can I, is it a simple tool to host my S bombs? And I'm still hearing that when I go, you know, um, when I go travel and stuff like that. Last week, actually, somebody from Akamai was like, "Oh yeah, I'm familiar with Guac. We're actually, been playing around with it internally." So this was at the DC Policy Summit. Somebody from Akamai was there. A few other folks had, even if they weren't using it, they're like, "Oh yeah, I've heard of it." A few folks did say, "Hey, I heard of it. We played around with it. Seemed a little bit complicated, and so we we put it on the shelf." But if there's stuff there that, again, if we can help with that journey, I think that was those are the two things from the past like week that people have been talking to me about at least.
So there were a couple of items there, right? I think that there's the justification portion. The WAC levels that you were mentioning, is this like a salsa levels? Isn't like a
Oh no, no, no.
okay, okay,
It's
okay.
more, yeah, it's more like for example, if I'm starting with like SQL, for example, let's just take SQL as an example. If I'm starting off a project, I'm usually starting off with like SQLite, or or then maybe like the next step in that journey is, oh, you know what? I spin up a container running Postgres locally. And then like, oh, now I'm running Postgres out in the cloud somewhere or whatever. And then at some level, you're like, wow, I have a multi-distributed Postgres with all sorts of stuff, yada, yada. And I think the challenges for a lot of folks is in the GUACs, and I know this is not the greatest analogy, but for the GUAC folks is it feels like it's, I have nothing. And then spinning up GUAC to get started is like, oh, I got to spin up a Postgres and I got to spin up this, I got to spin up that. And I got to run all this sort of, I got to get this graph up and running. And oh my gosh, is there something between absolutely nothing and, hey, I need to spin up all these different things for getting, good use out of GUAC? A good example was I'm blanking on her name again. Was it Rhea from HPE? She was saying that, she's getting a lot of value out of using the clearly defined integration. The challenge a little bit is still like spinning up all the stuff that you need and kind of learning GraphQL and learning all these different bits and making sure everything's there just to do like the clearly defined bit seemed a little overly complicated. So if there was something that was kind of like, hey, I could see why this is super valuable when I have 1,000 different applications and I need to pinpoint this license issue impacts these 40 applications in these ways, like being able to easily tell that, give that answer compared to I have 2 or 3 projects and I just need to, do a quick check on them. Oh, I now need to go and do all this, set up and yada, yada. It's that kind of thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, I wonder if there would be like a promotion path for like effectively having like a WAC1 in mem, sort of you can run this tool as a standalone tool and guidance as to this is the data that you would want to collect first. And as your project becomes more complicated and your infrastructure is more feature rich, then you move into the sort of like Docker Compose style. Here's a bunch of containers providing a bunch of different services, and you collect and you have a bunch of different collectors. Do we have an exhaustive, or not exhaustive, a list of use cases like outlined like explicitly, as in the clearly defined integration is useful. These are the things that are used for clearly defined. We have the sort of like the SBOM diffing and sort of like analytics part, which is also something that people are interested in. I think the core use case that we've always had is the sort of like the log4j edge coverage part, right? Tell me who reaches log4j case. I feel that all of those are supported by different like complexity of deployments, and I wonder if we can end up with a matrix that effectively says, this is what I want to answer or be able to answer, and this is the sort of like the complexity of the deployment that you need in order to provide that.
I guess that some of that, I don't know if we have some of that, but that actually sounds like something. Again, I don't want to throw that to Ben, but I'm curious what I don't think Ben necessarily needs to do it, but I'd be curious what Ben's thoughts are around organizing that and like, if a couple of us sort of sat down and just sort of started writing some of this down. I think, my thing is just, I have a lot of these conversations, but I don't know where I should be dumping this, like, because again, at a lot of the conferences, I'm traveling all the time. Where should I be dumping this stuff of, hey, this person said that they poked around with GUAC, but had this issue. Or this person, this person said that they used GUAC and they really appreciated these things with like clearly defined, but yeah.
Yeah, so to the first part, I was actually going to volunteer to take a first pass at putting together some use cases together. I don't know that we have anything well documented. Like there's bits and pieces on the website and stuff like that, but I think especially as we're talking about, the 2.0 architecture and things like that, having use cases that are, for lack of a better term, clearly defined, would really help in understanding what it is we want to build. And I think it would help communicate that to people as well. So I think that's a good idea. So I can start working on that over like the next week or two, just to get kind of a rough draft together. As for like where to store things, like that's a really good question. I kind of depend. I might say like open an issue for it. If it's like, if it's something we can act on, then it's probably worth having as a GitHub issue, just because, whether it's like, hey, it'd be cool if GUAC supported this, or, I tried to use GUAC and ran into this problems. Like those are both things we can address. So that's probably the best place to put stuff for now. If people have other ideas, I'm open to that as well.
There's like GitHub discussions or something like that. And we haven't gone through all the issues in the GUAC repo to try to triage them and move all the feature requests out and things like that. So I mean, issues are fine for now, but at some point we might want to do that. But yeah, I don't know if other people like those discussions or not. That tends to be a place to put things like, hey, this is a ways, a use case or a feature request. That's not an issue.
Yeah, I think, sorry, I was typing. Uh, Using the discussions can work pretty well. I know, the Zismore project has used that pretty well, like converting issues to discussions, and then, discussions into issues when they are sort of, you know, well defined and ready to be implemented. Um, I think the main question is, how much will those get used? Um, if we're not having a lot of community interaction, then, it might be overkill, but we can always try it out, see how it goes, and then stop doing that if we need to. Um, but yeah, I also agree that going through and triaging the issues, probably makes, a lot of sense. And I did ask for triage on the repo, in part because I wanted to be able to close out a few issues that I was pretty sure are, completed. So
Mike, do you think you would use the discussions for this or?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge always is so there's two pieces. One is discussions are really good when folks are engaged already at some level and they need that ability to sort of, hey, I have these questions or whatever. So I do wonder, like, I think the thing about it is like it's very low cost for us to just turn it on and try it. So on that end, I think I'm good with it. I think the thing we just want to watch out for is I think it's going to take a little bit of encouraging from our end to get folks to just sort of use it. Like, oh, hey, that's a good point. Can you, like, here's the link to just create a new discussion topic. Let's have that topic. Because I know, like, even, when we've talked to people who are like, hey, do you have a feature for this? And it's like, can you open up an issue? Oh, sure. And then they don't. So I think like really just sort of doing that follow up on it almost immediately, at least until we get that critical mass. Because I think once folks are using this on a more regular basis and they feel that like, yes, even clicking this link is because right now I worry that like the problem is less about even discussions. It's about like they take a look at a thing and they go, oh, it didn't really work, and whatever. It's just not even worth my time moving forward. But with that said, I do think that like just encouraging folks or showing them it a few times, and then if enough folks start to see, hey, there are a reasonable amount of discussion topics, yeah, let's keep discussing here. I've seen that work well.
Yeah, activity begets activity. So, even if it's just, the people on this call using it for a little bit, um, I think it'd be a good way to capture some of the ideas that we have that, we don't necessarily have time to work on right now and that aren't like fully formed thoughts yet. But that, especially since the Slack history is behind the paywall after a certain number of threads, I think, because I don't think OpenSSF actually pays for the full archive. So, doing something in the GitHub discussions makes it a little more preserved.
We need like a bot that you can click on a Slack message and open a discussion with it.
That would be cool. Brant, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a kind of a question, but also then kind of relates to the discussion of kind of trying to remain cognizant of V2 changes to the architecture. Like obviously a lot of things in motion there that have downstream impacts. Hey, you want to produce a tutorial, can't really start producing the tutorial for V2 until V2 is kind of available. But as maybe a good, GUAC novice and just going through all the docs, reading through, trying things myself, and then also being very partial to Kubernetes versus the Docker Compose examples. The things that stood out to me for like, hey, I want to try this. I want to enable one piece of this. Maybe I don't want the other thing right now. And I just want to swap, different pieces of values. I think that's kind of where the chart could really shine. And so I was looking at the experimental chart and playing around with that. And I think there's gaps to fill, things that might need to change in the future. But one thing that kind of stood out to me there was like it was well positioned for me to turn things off when I didn't want to deploy the full suite, the full gamut of everything guac, right? And so kind of to Michael's point of yeah, is Guac Lite. I know it's been mentioned in the past, something small, quick, easy to run. And then you could start adding things on top of it. Like, oh, I just want to redeploy and add this collector, um, or whatever it may be. Is kind of something that I think could be a huge value add to kind of part of this solution space. And so all of that said, I was curious about what if there were discussions on kind of the Kubernetes side of the house, and if that was like something active, something that was intended to be changed in the future, or kind of just best effort.
Jeff, go.
Yeah, so I don't think that we have anything set in stone. I had some thoughts on this in the past. We kind of thought about like how much do we want to work on, options or a system to like start and stop all the different collectors and, which ones do you want running with which parameters. We basically came to the idea that like we don't want to rebuild a, workload management system just to have run all the different pieces of guac and like, yeah, you should really, get familiar with the compose YAML or a Helm or Kubernetes to like run all the pieces you want. And we just need to document the binaries and their options. Now, what we don't have is good examples on like how to add a collector. That you want, hey, you want to run this, you need to run that, and et cetera. So that's something that I think we wish we had. On the Guac Lite side, I don't. Again, this is all just discussion and ideas, but my idea was it'd be more like a single binary. So like you run it and it you know ingests an SBOM, spins up a GraphQL server, or you can do some analysis on an SBOM or something like that. But maybe that would have the right parameters to like run in process, a different collector or something like that. So maybe you start it up and you say, I want to run this collector, and it all just is a single binary type thing instead of telling it to run separate collectors separately. But again, that's just my idea.
Yeah, I think that sounds great. I think there's a lot of ways to approach it, and then once you get to the scalability concerns, which direction do you take that? What do you recommend? And then how do you provide some safeguards? Um, all tough things to solve.
Yep.
Well, I think some of this conversation leads to the first thing that Mike brought up is, having GUAC integrated into LFX somehow. I feel like having at least a 1.0 is probably a prerequisite for doing anything like that. Um, just because we want to have something that's, that we consider stable and supported before we start having the Linux Foundation invest their time and resources into getting it running and building out the integrations and potentially you know kind of figuring out like will 2.0 be different enough that maybe LFX should wait for that, or will it be will there be enough sort of API type compatibility that we can give them 1.0, and then when 2.0 is production ready, you know swap it out with relatively minimal work on the integration side. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, we've debated a lot on whether what we have is with, you know, one what we have right now, or V1 is a V1 or not. So I still think that's a debatable thing. So don't we don't have to say that like what we have is not solid. Um, but maybe it's again, I don't know what's going on with the current discussion on like how they would use it, but maybe again it's a use case thing. Like, how much do we think what we have now would fit into the use case or not?
So maybe we come up with the use cases, figure out what we actually support right now, and then see if that's sufficient enough for getting the LF started.
Yeah.
I do think there's some value in sort of making that. I know we've kind of gone back and forth about what's 1.0, and there have been some discussions for at least the last 6 months or so about like, what sort of things do we need to complete to, officially call it 1.0. But I do think that's a decision we should probably arrive at soonish. Just because we can keep debating it for a long, long time, but at some point we need to kind of just settle and move forward. And if what we have now is basically 1.0, then cool, let's call it that. And if we still have 6 months more of work to do, then that's also good to know. Anything else to add? Any other topics for today?
The only other thing is the baseline. So we should look if we're complying with baseline. So again, most likely baseline will evolve into the thing that all Linux Foundation projects will have to do. My worry today a little bit is a lot of the folks who are working on baseline, who again I'm working with them, including Ben, are not doing a lot of the hands-on keyboard of like, engaging with a project. And they don't know necessarily like, hey, what counts as a secret or what counts as a thing that is sensitive or whatever. So I think going through there would be useful. And I know Ben, this is on your radar, but I think also what I would love to do is almost like if we could create a GitHub issue for, I know there is, but like if we could start to like almost go through and say, here's a checklist, and like make sure that we also have a record of like, hey, I spoke to, Jeff, who was doing this, this, and this, and I asked him, hey, what do you think would be the way we implement this requirement? And if the answer is like, I don't understand this, I think that's a good way to bring back to the baseline folks and say, hey, what would it take to do some of that? And then the other thing is, once baseline, there's a few folks who are talking about generating essentially like baselines in toto attestations with the actual stuff that's in there. That would be a good thing, I think, to also include in GUAC itself, so that folks can go in and say, oh, these projects follow baseline, and these projects don't, and that sort of thing. But any questions on baseline? Cool. Yeah, baseline isn't anything super complicated. Yeah, exactly. Cascading baseline would be a cool, that's kind of what I was thinking as well, is like if you could go and show, hey, like several layers of all of my projects are all following baseline, I feel significantly safer that I'm using good open sources. Is a pretty cool thing to do. And then the other thing that also I think is probably worthwhile to highlight is talking to maintainers about baseline. They felt a lot better about stuff like baseline, which felt more opt-in than scorecard, which they felt a little bit like one of the ways that baseline is being positioned is baseline is essentially just the practices. It's not necessarily how the practice, not the scan for the practices, but we are going to be integrating into, scorecard and some other sort of scanners and whatever to sort of generate all that stuff. The thing that I think is interesting there is we found that a lot more maintainers are more engaged when they feel like it's like a set of things that I have to do, and also it's a set of things that I can sort of attest to, say, hey, look, I can't find a baseline scanner that accepts my linter, so I'm just going to say I'm using this linter. Cool. Yeah.
All right. Anything else? All righty. I will note that the next community call is in about a week and a half. I know things have been kind of quiet in terms of activity in the last month or so. So I thought I'd start the thinking process of, what to add to that agenda a little earlier than I usually do. But if there's nothing else, I guess we'll call this meeting done for the day. Last call.